Jungkook prepared a secret surprise for Jimin, but Jimin broke down in tears before seeing it, revealing a hidden pain neither expected. "Jimin, don't open that door, please." Jungkook's voice cracked through the darkness, just as Jimin's trembling fingers closed around the silver handle. Rain hammered against the windows of the old house, turning the night outside into a blur of black glass and trembling reflections, while somewhere behind the locked door, a faint melody played over an ancient record player. Jimin froze. His breath caught halfway between his chest and his throat. He could hear Jungkook running toward him, footsteps striking the wooden floor with desperate urgency, but Jimin did not turn around. He stared at the door. Something about it felt painfully familiar. The smell of old cedar drifted through the narrow hallway, mixed with the faint scent of roses and candle wax. His fingers tightened around the handle. "Why?" Jimin whispered. Jungkook stopped several steps behind him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Rain continued to roar against the roof. The record player continued its soft, imperfect melody. "Because I wanted you to see it when you were ready," Jungkook said quietly. Jimin slowly turned. His eyes were already wet. "See what?" Jungkook swallowed. He had imagined this moment dozens of times. He had rehearsed what he would say while driving, while lying awake at 3 in the morning, while standing alone in the kitchen pretending to make coffee. He had prepared flowers. He had prepared photographs. He had prepared a room filled with memories. He had even prepared a small wooden box containing something he had kept hidden for years. But he had never prepared himself for Jimin crying before the surprise even began. "Jimin," Jungkook took one step forward. "You're crying." Jimin quickly wiped his cheek with the back of his hand. "I'm not. You are. It's the rain." Jungkook glanced toward the window. "We're inside." Jimin gave a weak laugh, but the laugh disappeared almost immediately. His shoulders trembled. "I'm sorry." Jungkook's expression softened. "Why are you apologizing?" Jimin looked down at the floor. That was one of Jimin's habits whenever he was afraid. He would stop looking at people. He would study something insignificant instead, the edge of a carpet, the reflection of a lamp, the movement of his own fingers, anything that allowed him to hide what was happening inside him. Jungkook knew that habit better than anyone. He also knew another one. Whenever Jimin was overwhelmed, he would press his thumb against the side of his index finger 3 times. Once, twice, 3 times. Jimin was doing it now. Jungkook's chest tightened. "You thought I was leaving?" Jungkook whispered. Jimin looked up. The silence answered for him. Jungkook's face changed. The excitement that had filled him all evening disappeared, replaced by something heavier. "Jimin, look at me." Jimin hesitated. "Please." Jimin finally raised his eyes. Jungkook walked toward him slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal. He stopped close enough to touch him but did not immediately reach out. "I'm not leaving." Jimin's lips trembled. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. People say that before they leave." The sentence struck Jungkook harder than Jimin intended. Jungkook lowered his gaze for a moment. He had known Jimin carried old fears. He had seen them in quiet moments, in the way Jimin sometimes woke from dreams and pretended nothing had happened, in the way Jimin checked his phone repeatedly when Jungkook was late, in the way Jimin sometimes asked casual questions that were never casual at all. "Are you happy here? Are you tired of me? Do you ever think about what your life would be like without me?" Jimin never asked those questions directly. Instead, he disguised them as jokes. Jungkook had always answered with laughter. Tonight, he realized laughter had never been enough. "I should have told you," Jungkook said. "Told me what? About tonight?" Jimin shook his head. "No, I would have ruined it. You could never ruin anything for me." Jimin looked toward the locked door again. "Then why am I crying?" Jungkook smiled sadly. "Maybe because you're carrying too much." Jimin closed his eyes. Another tear escaped. Jungkook finally reached for him. His hand settled gently against Jimin's cheek, warm against skin chilled by the night air. Jimin leaned into the touch instinctively. That tiny movement broke something inside Jungkook. He had planned an extravagant surprise because he wanted Jimin to remember a beautiful night. He had wanted candles, music, photographs, flowers, and a room filled with everything they had survived together. But standing there, watching Jimin struggle to breathe through tears, Jungkook understood that the real surprise had never been the room. It was the promise behind it. "Jimin," Jungkook whispered, "I brought you here because I wanted to show you something I made for you." Jimin stared at him. "You made it?" Jungkook nodded. "For months." Jimin's eyebrows pulled together. "Months, almost a year." "Jungkook, I know." Jungkook smiled faintly. "That's why I'm terrible at keeping secrets." Jimin let out a small, broken laugh. "You're terrible at everything involving secrets." "I know. You stare at me whenever you're hiding something." "I know." you become suspiciously nice. Jungkook raised an eyebrow. Suspiciously nice? You bought me strawberry cake 3 times last week. You like strawberry cake. You hate strawberry cake. Jungkook paused. That is irrelevant. Jimin laughed again, this time genuinely, though tears still clung to his eyelashes. Jungkook watched him carefully. That laugh was exactly what he had wanted. He had spent months creating something for Jimin, but all along, what he wanted most was that sound. Come here, Jungkook whispered. Jimin stepped forward. Jungkook wrapped both arms around him. Jimin immediately buried his face against Jungkook's shoulder. The rain grew louder outside, but inside the hallway, everything seemed strangely quiet. Jungkook felt Jimin's fingers curl into the back of his jacket. I'm scared, Jimin admitted. Jungkook closed his eyes. Of the surprise, Jimin shook his head. Of losing this. Jungkook tightened his arms around him. You're not losing me. Promise, promise. Don't say it if you don't mean it. Jungkook pulled away just enough to look directly into Jimin's eyes. I mean it. Jimin searched his face as if trying to detect the smallest lie. Jungkook remained still. Finally, Jimin nodded. Okay. Jungkook wiped the tears from Jimin's cheeks with both thumbs. Now I need you to trust me. Jimin glanced at the door. Do I have to close my eyes? Yes, that sounds dangerous. It's not. You said that last time before taking me to that restaurant where the waiter accidentally dropped soup on my shoes. That was not my fault. You chose the restaurant. Fine, this time trust me. Jimin sighed dramatically. Fine. He closed his eyes. Jungkook smiled. He gently took Jimin's hand. Don't open them. I won't. Seriously, Jungkook. Yes, if you keep talking, I'm going to open them. Okay, I'm silent. Jungkook carefully unlocked the door. The hinges whispered. Warm golden light spilled into the hallway, illuminating Jimin's closed face. The scent of roses became stronger. Jimin's breathing changed. He could hear music now, soft piano notes drifting through the room. Jungkook guided him forward slowly. Every step carried Jimin deeper into a space he could not yet see. He felt the temperature change. The floor beneath his shoes changed from polished wood to a thick carpet. He smelled lavender, paper, old books, and something sweet that reminded him of winter mornings. Jungkook, I'm here. You're still holding my hand? Always. Jimin smiled despite himself. Jungkook stopped him in the center of the room. Okay, Jimin waited. Jungkook looked around. Everything was exactly as he had planned. Along the walls were photographs, not glamorous photographs, not staged photographs, real ones. Jimin laughing with his mouth full of food. Jimin asleep on a couch with a blanket pulled over his head. Jimin standing in the kitchen holding a burnt piece of toast. Jimin sitting beside Jungkook on a train. Jimin staring through a window during sunrise. Jimin wearing an oversized sweater. Jimin smiling without realizing anyone was watching. Hundreds of moments filled the room. In the center stood a small wooden table covered with handwritten notes. At the far end of the room stood a large canvas hidden beneath white fabric, and beside it was a small wooden box. Jungkook had spent almost a year collecting these memories. He had written the dates beneath each photograph. He remembered where they had been, what they had eaten, what song had been playing, and sometimes even what Jimin had said. He remembered things Jimin himself had forgotten. Open your eyes, Jungkook whispered. Jimin opened them. He did not move. His eyes traveled slowly across the room. One photograph, then another, then another. His mouth opened slightly. His breathing stopped. Jungkook, the name came out as barely more than air. Jungkook watched him. Jimin stepped forward. His fingers hovered over a photograph but did not touch it. It showed him sitting on the floor of a tiny apartment, laughing so hard that his eyes were closed. Jungkook stood behind the camera. Jimin remembered that day. It had been raining. They had ordered too much food. The electricity had gone out for 20 minutes. They had used phone flashlights and told ridiculous stories in the darkness. You kept this? Jimin whispered. Of course. Jimin moved to another photograph. He was holding a cup of coffee standing beside a window. I forgot this day. I didn't. Another photograph showed Jimin sleeping. He frowned at it. You took this while I was asleep. You looked peaceful. I looked terrible. You looked beautiful. Jimin shook his head, but a smile appeared. He continued walking. Every photograph revealed another piece of their shared history. There were small notes beneath them. You laughed for 11 minutes because the dog stole your sandwich. You sang terribly in the car and refused to admit it. You called me at 2:14 a.m. because you couldn't sleep. You said the moon looked lonely. You promised to show me the ocean someday. Jimin's fingers began trembling. He reached one particular photograph and stopped. It showed the two of them sitting on a rooftop, backs against the railing, watching the city lights. Underneath it, Jungkook had written one sentence. This was the night I realized home could be a person. Jimin covered his mouth. Tears fell freely now. Jungkook approached him. Jimin turned. Why did you do all this? Jungkook smiled. Because you keep thinking happiness has to be loud to be real. Jimin stared at him. You always remember the big things, Jungkook continued. Birthdays, anniversaries, trips, celebrations, but I remember the small things. He pointed toward the photographs. Those are the moments I never want to forget. Jimin wiped his face. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. But you spent so much time, I wanted to. Why? Jungkook looked at him for a long moment. Because sometimes you look at our life as if you're waiting for something to take it away. Jimin became still. Jungkook's voice softened. I noticed. Jimin looked down. I tried not to. I know. I don't want to be that person. You aren't. Sometimes I am. Jungkook stepped closer. Jimin, being afraid doesn't make you weak. Jimin swallowed. What if one day you wake up and realize this isn't what you want? Then I'll tell you. What if you get tired? Then I'll tell you. What if, Jimin? Jungkook gently interrupted him. You don't have to spend every beautiful moment preparing for the moment it ends. Jimin's eyes filled again. Jungkook took his hand. You can just be here. Jimin stared at their joined hands. Here. Jimin nodded slowly. Okay. Jungkook squeezed his fingers. There's more. Jimin looked up. Mori, the room isn't the surprise. Jimin blinked. It isn't. Jungkook shook his head. He walked toward the covered canvas and placed his hand on the fabric. This is. Jimin watched him. Jungkook paused. For the first time that night, uncertainty crossed his face. I made this because I wanted to give you something that couldn't disappear. He pulled the fabric away. Jimin's breath caught. The canvas was enormous. It showed two figures standing beneath a night sky, surrounded by hundreds of tiny painted lights. But the figures were not facing each other. They were facing the same horizon. Above them, written in delicate handwriting, were the words, we don't need to know how every chapter ends. We only need to choose the next one together. Jimin stepped closer. His fingertips touched the painted surface. You painted this? Mostly. I ruined the first three. Jimin smiled through his tears. Of course you did. I kept trying until it looked right. It looks beautiful. Jungkook's expression softened. It still isn't the best part. Jimin turned toward him. Jungkook reached for the small wooden box. His hand shook slightly as he carried it toward Jimin. Jungkook, open it. Jimin stared at the box. Are you sure? Yes. Jimin took it carefully. The wood was warm beneath his fingertips. There was no lock. He lifted the lid. Inside was a simple object wrapped in dark blue cloth. Jimin slowly unfolded the cloth. His expression changed. It was a small silver key. Attached to it was a handwritten note. Jimin read it silently. His eyes widened. What is this? He whispered. Jungkook took a breath. A key. I can see that. Then you know what it does. Jimin looked at him. No, Jungkook smiled. It opens the front door. Jimin stared at him, confused. Which front door? Jungkook's smile grew softer. Ours. Jimin stopped breathing for a moment. What? Jungkook took his hand again. The house next door. I bought it 6 months ago. Jimin looked toward the walls separating the two properties. You bought a house? Yes. Why? Because you once told me you wanted a place with a garden. Jimin's eyes widened. I said that once. I remember. Jungkook, there are roses outside. Jimin's lips trembled. You remembered that too. I remember everything you tell me. Jimin looked down at the key in his palm. He closed his fingers around it. This isn't about a house, Jungkook said. It's about giving you a place where you don't have to wonder if you belong. Jimin looked up. Jungkook's eyes were shining now. You belong, Jungkook whispered. Not because I bought a house, not because I made a room, not because I collected photographs. You belong because I choose you every day. Jimin couldn't hold himself together anymore. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Jungkook. Jungkook held him tightly. Jimin cried against his shoulder, but this time the tears were different. They carried fear, relief, gratitude, and the strange ache of finally allowing himself to believe something good might stay. Jungkook rested his cheek against Jimin's hair. You okay? Jimin nodded. I'm trying. That's enough. Outside, the rain began to soften. The record player reached the end of the song and clicked quietly. Neither of them moved. The room remained filled with photographs of ordinary moments. The canvas remained beneath the warm light, and the small silver key remained tightly enclosed in Jimin's hand. For the first time in a long while, Jimin wasn't thinking about tomorrow or yesterday. He wasn't wondering how long happiness would last. He was simply standing there with Jungkook, listening to the rain fade beyond the windows, feeling the steady rhythm of Jungkook's heartbeat beneath his ear, and allowing himself to believe that perhaps home was not a place waiting somewhere in the future. Perhaps home had been holding him all along. The next morning, Jimin woke before the alarm, staring at the pale ceiling while the memory of the previous night returned piece by piece. The rain, the photographs, Jungkook's trembling voice, the silver key, and the sentence that had made something inside him finally loosen, "You belong." For several minutes, Jimin remained still beneath the blanket, listening to the quiet house. Somewhere downstairs, a cupboard opened. A spoon struck the edge of a cup. Then came Jungkook's muffled humming, slightly off-key and completely unmistakable. Jimin smiled before he even realized it. He slipped out of bed and walked barefoot down the stairs. The smell of coffee and toasted bread filled the kitchen. Jungkook stood at the counter wearing an oversized grey sweater, his hair messy, one hand holding a frying pan while the other tried to rescue a piece of toast that had already burned. Jimin leaned against the doorway. "You're burning breakfast." Jungkook nearly dropped the toast. "You scared me," Jimin laughed. "You were humming." "I wasn't." "You were." "I was thinking." "You were humming while thinking." Jungkook looked at the burnt toast. "The toast distracted me." Jimin walked closer. "The toast distracted you?" "Yes." "From what?" Jungkook glanced at him. "You." Jimin rolled his eyes, but his smile deepened. "You're impossible, and yet you came downstairs, because I smelled something burning. So you came to save me." "I came to save the kitchen." Jungkook placed the toast on a plate. "Same thing." Jimin laughed softly. It felt strange how ordinary the morning was after such an extraordinary night. There was no dramatic music, no hidden room, no carefully arranged photographs. Just 2 cups of coffee, a ruined piece of toast, and sunlight slowly crawling across the kitchen floor. Yet Jimin felt something different in his chest. House no longer felt like a place he was visiting. It felt lived in. It felt safe. Jungkook noticed him staring toward the window. "What are you thinking?" Jimin shook his head. "Nothing." Jungkook narrowed his eyes. "That answer usually means something." Jimin smiled. "I'm thinking about the key." Jungkook's expression softened. "You still have it?" Jimin reached into the pocket of his pajama pants and pulled it out. "I slept with it." Jungkook blinked. "You slept with the key?" "Yes." "Why?" Jimin looked at the silver object resting in his palm. "Because I was afraid it would disappear." Jungkook's smile faded slightly. He walked toward Jimin and gently closed Jimin's fingers around the key. "It won't." Jimin looked at him. "You can't promise that about everything." "No," Jungkook was honest. "I can't." Jimin's eyes lowered. "That's what scares me." Jungkook took a slow breath. "Then let's make a different promise." Jimin looked up. "What promise?" "When something changes, we talk about it. When we're afraid, we say it. When something hurts, we don't pretend it doesn't." Jimin was silent. Jungkook continued, "And when we're happy, we don't apologize for it." Jimin stared at him for several seconds. "You really thought about this?" "I had a lot of time while painting." "You painted that entire canvas alone?" "Mostly." "What does mostly mean?" "I asked for help with the sky." Jimin laughed. "From whom?" "A professional." "You hired someone to paint the sky?" "I was struggling." "Jungkook." "What? You are ridiculous, but talented." "Debatable." Jungkook smiled. "Eat your breakfast." Jimin sat at the table. He watched Jungkook move around the kitchen, opening drawers, searching for plates, forgetting where he had placed things, then finding them in his own hands. Jimin had always loved these little habits. Jungkook never noticed how often he tapped his fingers against the counter when he was thinking. He never realized he pushed his hair backward whenever he was nervous. He always left cabinet doors slightly open. He drank water only after someone reminded him. He could remember the smallest detail about Jimin, but regularly forgot where he put his phone. Jimin watched him now and felt an unfamiliar ache behind his ribs. "Jungkook, why didn't you tell me about the house?" Jungkook stopped. "Because I wanted it to be a surprise." "No. I mean, why didn't you tell me you were planning something this big?" Jungkook looked down. "Because I was afraid." Jimin's smile disappeared. "Of what?" Jungkook leaned against the counter. "Of making you uncomfortable." "Why would I be uncomfortable?" "Because sometimes people give you something beautiful and then expect you to give something back." Jimin studied him carefully. Jungkook's eyes had changed. Beneath his calm expression was an old fear Jimin had rarely seen. "Did someone make you feel that way?" Jimin asked. Jungkook looked toward the window. "A long time ago." Jimin waited. Jungkook did not continue. Jimin knew better than to force him. "You don't have to tell me." "I want to." Jungkook sat across from him. For several seconds he said nothing. "When I was younger," Jungkook finally began, "I thought love was something you earned by being useful. If you could solve problems, if you could make people happy, if you could give enough, then maybe they would stay." Jimin's expression softened. "Jungkook, I know it's not true." He smiled faintly. "I know now, but some beliefs don't disappear just because you understand them." Jimin reached across the table. Their fingers touched. "That's why you made the room." Jungkook nodded. Maybe you were trying to prove something. Maybe I was trying to prove it to myself. Jimin squeezed his hand. You don't have to earn my staying. Jungkook looked at him. I know. Do you? Jungkook smiled sadly. I'm learning. Jimin nodded. So am I. They sat quietly for a while. The sunlight grew brighter. Outside, birds moved through the garden that Jimin had not yet seen. After breakfast, Jungkook took the silver key from Jimin's hand and placed it on the table. Come on. Where? You haven't seen the garden. Jimin's eyes widened. There really is a garden? You sound surprised. Because you once killed a cactus. That cactus was weak. You forgot to water it for 3 weeks. It survived. It died. It had a dramatic personality. Jimin laughed so loudly that Jungkook smiled. They walked through the back door. The morning air was cool and damp from the previous night's rain. Drops of water clung to the leaves, catching the sunlight like tiny pieces of glass. The garden stretched behind the house, larger than Jimin expected. Roses climbed along a wooden fence. White flowers grew around a narrow stone path. At the center stood a small bench beneath an old tree. Jimin stopped. You planted all of this? Not all of it. Jungkook pointed toward the roses. Those were already here. Jimin walked toward them. He touched one petal gently. They're beautiful. You said you wanted roses. I said I liked roses. Same thing. Jimin turned around. Not exactly. Jungkook smiled. To me it is. Jimin looked around. How long have you been coming here? Jungkook hesitated. A while. Without telling me? Yes. Why? Because I wanted to imagine you here. Jimin's expression changed. Jungkook immediately looked embarrassed. That sounded strange. No, Jimin shook his head. It didn't. Jungkook walked to the bench. I used to sit here after work. Jimin followed. Alone, mostly. What did you think about? Jungkook looked toward the garden. You. Jimin smiled. You think about me too much. Probably. That's unhealthy. Probably. Jimin sat beside him. Their shoulders touched. What did you imagine? Jungkook took a moment before answering. I imagined ordinary mornings. Jimin looked at him. That's all. That's everything. Jungkook's voice became quieter. I imagined you complaining about the weather. I imagined you stealing my coffee. I imagined you leaving books everywhere. I imagined you forgetting to close the garden door. I imagined arguing about what to eat. Jimin smiled. You imagined us arguing? Constantly? How romantic. Very. Jimin rested his head against Jungkook's shoulder. I like that. Jungkook looked down at him. You do? Yes. Jimin closed his eyes. Because ordinary means real. Jungkook's fingers found Jimin's hand. That's what I wanted. They remained on the bench for several minutes, listening to the leaves move above them. Then Jimin noticed something tied to one of the rose branches. It was a small white envelope. What's that? Jungkook followed his gaze. His expression changed. Oh, Jimin reached for it. Is that another surprise? Not exactly. Jimin opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the garden before Jungkook had changed it. The yard had been empty, overgrown, and covered with weeds. On the back was a handwritten sentence. This was where I started building a future I wasn't sure I deserved. Jimin read it twice. He looked at Jungkook. You wrote this? Yes. When? Or I bought the house. Jimin folded the photograph carefully. You really were scared. Jungkook looked away. More than I told you. Of me? No, he shook his head. Of failing you. Jimin's eyes softened. Jungkook, you don't have to build an entire world for me. I know. Then why did you? Jungkook looked at him. Because building things is how I cope with fear. Jimin smiled faintly. I cry when I'm scared. I know. You build houses. Apparently. We're a strange pair. Very. Jimin leaned closer. But we work. Jungkook smiled. We do. The rest of the day passed slowly. They explored every room of the house together. Jimin found a small music room filled with instruments, a reading corner overlooking the garden, and a kitchen where Jungkook had secretly stocked every snack Jimin loved. Jimin discovered a drawer filled with handwritten recipes. Some were written in Jungkook's handwriting, others were printed from old notes Jimin had once casually mentioned. At the bottom was a recipe titled Jimin's Rainy Day Soup. Jimin stared at it. You wrote this? I tried. You don't even like soup. I like you. Jimin smiled. That doesn't answer the question. It answers everything. In the afternoon, they returned to the room filled with photographs. Jimin sat cross-legged on the floor studying each picture. He noticed something he had missed the previous night. Every photograph had a date. Some were years old, some were recent. Some were moments he barely remembered. You kept all of these? He asked. Jungkook sat beside him. Yes. Why? Because memories disappear when we stop paying attention. Jimin picked up a photograph from several years earlier. They looked younger, more uncertain. Almost like strangers who had not yet discovered how much they would eventually mean to one another. We changed, Jimin whispered. A lot. Yes. Do you miss who we were? Jungkook shook his head. No, not even a little. I miss certain moments, but I don't want to go backward. Jimin looked at him. Why? Because I like who we are now. Jimin smiled. Even with all the problems, especially with them, that sounds strange. Maybe. Jungkook touched the edge of the photograph. Problems taught me how to listen to you. Jimin's smile faded. I wasn't always good at talking. Neither was I, you still aren't. True, Jimin laughed. Then he noticed another photograph hidden behind the others. He pulled it free. His expression immediately changed. It showed Jungkook sitting alone in the garden at night. There were no roses visible, only darkness and the faint outline of the house. Jimin turned it over. There was no date, no message, nothing. Who took this? Jimin asked. Jungkook looked at the photograph and became very quiet. I did. Why? Jungkook stared at it. That was the night I almost gave up on everything. Jimin's fingers tightened around the picture. What happened? Jungkook took a slow breath. Nothing dramatic. Jungkook, that's the truth. He looked at Jimin. Sometimes nothing dramatic has to happen for someone to feel like they're falling apart. Jimin remained silent. Jungkook continued. I had spent so long trying to be strong that I forgot strength doesn't mean never breaking. Jimin moved closer. Were you alone? Yes, you should have called me. Jungkook looked down. I didn't want you to see me like that. Jimin's expression tightened. Why? Because I thought you'd think less of me. Jimin immediately shook his head. I would never. I know that now. Jimin took the photograph from his hand and placed it on the floor. Then he held Jungkook's face between his palms. Listen to me. Jungkook looked at him. You don't have to be strong every second you're with me. Jungkook's eyes became glassy. I know. No. Jimin shook his head. I need you to know it. Jungkook closed his eyes briefly. I'm trying. Jimin rested his forehead against his. Then try with me. Jungkook exhaled shakily. Okay. They stayed that way, forehead against forehead, until the room became quiet again. No dramatic promise was necessary. No grand gesture could improve the moment. For once, the most meaningful thing Jungkook could give Jimin was simply the truth, and the most meaningful thing Jimin could give Jungkook was the certainty that truth would not make him leave. As evening arrived, they cooked together. Jungkook chopped vegetables while Jimin stirred the soup. They argued about seasoning, laughed when Jungkook spilled pepper across the counter, and ended up eating directly from the same pot because neither wanted to wash another bowl. Later, they returned to the garden. The rain had stopped completely. The sky was clear enough to reveal a scattering of stars. Jimin sat beneath the old tree while Jungkook brought 2 blankets. He wrapped one around Jimin and sat beside him. Are you happy? Jungkook asked. Jimin looked at the garden, the house, the roses, and finally Jungkook. Yes. Really? Really? Jungkook smiled. Good. Jimin rested his head against Jungkook's shoulder. But I think I understand the surprise now. You do? It wasn't the house. Jungkook looked at him. No, it wasn't the photographs either. No, Jimin intertwined their fingers. It was you showing me that you remembered. Jungkook's eyes softened. Yes, Jimin closed his eyes. Thank you. For what? For making me feel like my memories matter. Jungkook kissed the top of Jimin's head. They do. The garden fell quiet around them. The roses moved gently in the evening breeze. Somewhere beyond the fence, a distant car passed and disappeared. Jimin held the silver key in one hand and Jungkook's hand in the other. For the first time, neither object felt like a promise that the future would be perfect. They were something better. They were reminders that whatever happened next, they would face it honestly, side by side. Jimin looked toward the house glowing warmly behind them and smiled. Jungkook, can we stay here tonight? Jungkook smiled. Of course. Jimin squeezed his hand. Then let's go home. Jungkook looked at the house, then at Jimin. Home? Jimin nodded. Home. And together they walked back through the garden, leaving the old bench beneath the tree and carrying with them the quiet certainty that sometimes the greatest surprise was not discovering something new, but finally recognizing what had been there all along. At 6 in the morning, Jimin woke to the sound of rain tapping gently against the bedroom window, and for a few seconds he did not remember where he was. Then he felt Jungkook's arm resting loosely around his waist, heard the quiet rhythm of Jungkook's breathing behind him, and remembered the garden, the photographs, the silver key, and the word home. Jimin smiled into the pillow. He had spent years waking up with the instinct to check the room, check the time, check his phone, check whether the person beside him was still there, but that morning he did none of those things. He simply stayed still. Jungkook stirred behind him. You're awake, Jungkook murmured. How did you know? You stopped breathing like someone who was asleep. Jimin turned around. That's a ridiculous explanation. Jungkook opened one eye. It's accurate. You're annoying in the morning. You're beautiful in the morning. Jimin immediately pulled the blanket over his face. Jungkook laughed softly. Why are you hiding? Because you're embarrassing. You weren't embarrassed last night. Jimin peeked out. Last night was different. How? Jimin hesitated. Last night I believed you. Jungkook's smile slowly faded into something tender. And today, Jimin looked at him, today I'm trying to keep believing you. Jungkook reached beneath the blanket and found Jimin's hand. Their fingers intertwined. That's enough. Outside, the rain became heavier. Jimin listened to it for a while, enjoying the strange comfort of being nowhere else. Do you know what I like about rain? He asked. You always say it makes everything quieter. It does. That's why you like it. Maybe. Jimin looked toward the window. When I was younger, rain made me feel like the world was allowed to stop for a while. Jungkook watched him carefully. You never told me that. There are many things I never told you. Then tell me now. Jimin smiled faintly. All of them. We have time. Jimin's expression softened. That's a dangerous promise. Why? Because I might actually believe you. Jungkook squeezed his hand. Then believe me. They remained in bed for another half hour, talking about things that had never seemed important enough to say. Jimin confessed that he sometimes counted the seconds between thunder and lightning when he couldn't sleep. Jungkook admitted that he secretly practiced conversations before difficult meetings. Jimin laughed when Jungkook revealed that he still kept an old receipt from the first cafe they had visited together. Jungkook laughed when Jimin admitted that he had once memorized Jungkook's coffee order simply because he liked hearing Jungkook say thank you. None of those things were grand, yet somehow they felt more intimate than any declaration. After breakfast, Jimin wandered through the house alone while Jungkook disappeared into the garage. He explored the rooms again, this time without the excitement of discovery. He noticed details he had missed the day before. A tiny framed photograph sat beside the staircase. A handwritten note was tucked behind a vase. A shelf contained books Jimin had once mentioned wanting to read. The house was full of him. Not in a frightening way, but in a way that made him realize how carefully Jungkook had listened over the years. Jimin stopped in front of a narrow door at the end of the hallway. He had not noticed it before. There was no handle, only a small circular indentation where a lock might have been. Jimin touched it lightly. What is this? Jungkook's voice came from behind him. Jimin turned. Jungkook stood several steps away, holding a toolbox. A room. Obviously, a room I haven't finished. Min raised an eyebrow. Why? Jungkook looked at the door. Because I didn't know what to put inside. You designed an entire house but couldn't decide what to put in one room. Exactly. Jimin smiled. What's it supposed to be? Jungkook shrugged. Maybe nothing. That's suspicious. Why? Because you're Jungkook. That is not evidence. Jimin laughed. Open it. Jungkook hesitated. Not yet. Jimin noticed the hesitation. Why? Because I want you to help me decide. Jimin stared at him. Me, yes. Jungkook put down the toolbox. This house was built from things I remembered about you, but I don't want every room to be about what I think you want. I want one room to become whatever we decide together. Jimin looked at the door for a long moment. A room with no purpose, a room with every purpose. That sounds like something you would say when you haven't figured anything out. Maybe I haven't, Jimin smiled. Then let's leave it empty. Jungkook looked surprised. Empty? Yes. Why? Because sometimes an empty space is good. Jimin touched the door. It means there's still room for something we haven't imagined. Jungkook stared at him. I like that. I know. They left the room untouched. Later that afternoon, Jungkook took Jimin into town. The drive was quiet at first. Rainwater still covered the roads, and the sky was pale gray. Jimin watched houses pass by the window. Jungkook drove with one hand while the other rested near the gearshift. Jimin noticed the old receipt tucked into the dashboard. Is that the receipt? Jungkook glanced at it. What receipt? The one you said you kept. Jungkook looked embarrassed. Maybe. Jimin reached toward it. Can I see? No. Why? It's embarrassing. You keep sentimental trash. It's not trash. It's a receipt. It's important. Jimin smiled. Why? Jungkook sighed. Because it was the first time you bought my coffee. Jimin's expression softened. You remember that. You complained that my coffee tasted terrible. It did. You drank half of it. Because I was thirsty. You said it was terrible and drank half. That's not relevant. Jungkook laughed. Everything about you is relevant. Jimin turned toward the window to hide his smile. They stopped at a small bookstore. Jimin wandered between shelves while Jungkook followed. Jimin picked up one book, then another, then placed both back. What are you looking for? Jungkook asked. Nothing. You always say that before finding 5 things. I am browsing. You are collecting. There is a difference. Not financially. Jimin laughed. They eventually left with several books and a small notebook Jimin insisted he didn't need. Back in the car, Jimin opened the notebook. The first page was blank. He stared at it for a moment. "What are you thinking?" Jungkook asked. "I'm wondering what to write." "You don't have to write anything." "I know." Jimin ran his fingers over the paper. "Maybe I want to." Jungkook looked at him briefly before returning his attention to the road. "Then write." Jimin smiled. "What would you write?" "Probably something terrible." "You write beautifully." "That's because you can't read my handwriting." Jimin laughed. "Fair." He wrote a single sentence. Jungkook glanced at it at the next red light. "What did you write?" Jimin closed the notebook. "It's private. You never let me have secrets. Now you know how it feels." Jungkook smiled. "Good." That evening they returned home with bags of groceries. They cooked together again, but this time Jimin insisted on making dessert. Jungkook watched him struggle with the recipe. "You're putting too much sugar." "No, I'm not." "You are. You don't trust me." "I trust you. I don't trust the sugar." Jimin threw a small piece of chocolate at him. Jungkook caught it in his mouth. "Show off." "You started it." "You distracted me." "How?" "By talking." "That's my greatest talent." "No. Your greatest talent is remembering things I don't remember telling you." Jungkook became quiet. Jimin noticed immediately. "What?" "Nothing." "Jungkook, I'm fine." Jimin put down the spoon. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Pretending." Jungkook looked at him. Jimin stepped closer. "You told me we wouldn't do that." Jungkook lowered his gaze. "You're right, so tell me." Jungkook took a breath. "I'm worried." "About what?" "That I made everything too big." Jimin frowned. "The house." "All of it?" Jungkook looked around the kitchen. "The photographs, the garden, the room, the key. I wanted to give you something beautiful, but now I'm wondering if I made you feel like you have to stay because of everything I built." Jimin stared at him. Then he slowly reached for Jungkook's hand. "Look at me." Jungkook did. "I didn't stay because of the house." Jimin's voice was gentle. "I stayed because you're here." Jungkook's eyes softened. "I didn't keep the key because I felt obligated." Jimin raised his hand, showing the silver key. "I kept it because it reminds me that someone listened." Jungkook swallowed. "And I didn't cry because I was unhappy." "I know." "No, you don't." Jimin stepped closer. "I cried because I was happy and didn't know how to hold that much happiness without being afraid it would disappear." Jungkook's eyes became wet. Jimin continued, "You keep thinking your job is to make everything perfect so I won't leave. But that's not what I need." "What do you need?" Jimin touched Jungkook's chest. "You." Jungkook closed his eyes. Jimin rested his forehead against his. "Not the house, not the garden, not the photographs." He smiled softly. "Just you." Jungkook's arms wrapped around him. "I'm trying to believe that." "Then try harder." Jungkook laughed quietly against his shoulder. "You're demanding." "Yes, I like that." They finished dinner together. Afterward, Jimin took the notebook to the garden. The rain had stopped again. The air smelled of wet earth and roses. He sat beneath the tree and opened the notebook. Jungkook joined him with 2 cups of tea. "Still writing?" "Maybe." Jimin turned the notebook around. On the first page he had written, "Today I stopped waiting for happiness to leave." Jungkook read the sentence silently. His expression changed. "That's beautiful." Jimin closed the notebook. "Don't make me regret showing you." "Never." They sat quietly. The garden was almost completely dark except for the warm light coming from the house. Jimin looked toward the empty room upstairs. "I know what I want that room to become." Jungkook looked at him. "What?" "A place for things we haven't done yet." "Like what?" "Trips we haven't taken, songs we haven't heard, books we haven't read, photos we haven't taken." Jungkook smiled. "And memories we haven't made." "Exactly." Jungkook took his hand. "Then it's ours." Jimin nodded. "Ours." The following weeks became a collection of ordinary happiness. Jimin filled the empty room with small objects connected to dreams they had never pursued. A map covered one wall. A shelf held books they planned to read together. A small box contained tickets from places they wanted to visit. Jungkook added a camera. Jimin added a jar labeled someday. Whenever one of them thought of something they wanted to experience together, they wrote it on a piece of paper and placed it inside. They did not know when those dreams would happen. That was the point. They were not promises carved into stone. They were possibilities. One evening, Jimin found Jungkook standing alone in the room, staring at the jar. "What did you put inside?" Jimin asked. Jungkook smiled. "A secret." "Again?" "Yes." Jimin walked over. "You're terrible at secrets. This one is staying." Jimin pretended to be offended. "Fine." He reached for another piece of paper. "Then I'll add mine." "What is it?" "Secret." Jungkook smiled. "Fair." They placed their papers inside the jar without reading them. Months passed, and the house slowly became less like Jungkook's surprise and more like their shared home. The photographs remained on the walls, but new photographs appeared beside them. Jimin added pictures of Jungkook cooking, sleeping on the couch, laughing in the garden, and struggling with a broken lamp. Jungkook added pictures of Jimin dancing barefoot in the kitchen, reading beneath the tree, and falling asleep with a book open on his chest. The garden changed with the seasons. The roses bloomed brighter. The empty room filled slowly. Yet the most important thing changed inside Jimin. He stopped checking the clock whenever Jungkook was late. He stopped interpreting silence as abandonment. He stopped asking questions designed to test whether Jungkook still loved him, not because the fear vanished completely, but because Jimin had learned to speak before fear became a wall. And Jungkook changed too. He stopped believing that every problem needed to be solved immediately. He learned to sit beside Jimin without trying to fix his sadness. He learned that sometimes love meant listening without building anything. One evening, they sat together on the kitchen floor eating strawberries from the same bowl. Jimin looked at Jungkook and suddenly laughed. "What?" Jungkook asked. "Nothing. You're staring. I'm thinking about the night you surprised me." Jungkook smiled. "You cried before you saw anything." "I was terrified, I know, but now I think I understand why." Jungkook waited. Jimin picked up a strawberry. "I wasn't crying because I thought your surprise would be terrible. I figured. I cried because part of me didn't believe someone could plan happiness for me without wanting something in return." Jungkook's expression softened. And now, Jimin looked around the kitchen at the photographs, at the garden beyond the window, at the silver key hanging beside the front door. Then he looked at Jungkook. "Now I know love doesn't have to be something I survive." Jungkook reached for his hand. "No," Jimin smiled. "Sometimes it can be something I live." Jungkook squeezed his fingers. Outside, the evening wind moved through the roses. Inside, the house was warm and bright. There were still fears. There were still things neither of them understood. There would be difficult days, misunderstandings, moments when old wounds reopened. But they no longer mistook difficulty for the end. They had learned something more valuable than certainty. They had learned how to remain. And as Jimin leaned against Jungkook's shoulder that night, the silver key resting safely on the table beside them, neither of them needed another surprise. The greatest gift Jungkook had given Jimin was not a house, a garden, or a room filled with memories. It was the freedom to believe that happiness could exist without a countdown, and Jimin, in return, had given Jungkook something just as precious, the freedom to be loved without constantly proving that he deserved it. "Jungkook, why is there a photograph of me that I have never seen before?" Jimin's voice came from the upstairs hallway, and the cup in Jungkook's hand slipped hard enough against the kitchen counter to spill coffee across the wood. Jungkook froze. For the first time since the night he had given Jimin the silver key, genuine panic crossed his face. He wiped the coffee with one hand and looked toward the stairs. "Jimin, come here." Jungkook swallowed. "Where?" "The room." Jungkook closed his eyes briefly. The empty room, the room that had slowly become their room of unfinished dreams, the room where they kept the jar labeled someday, the room where Jimin had recently started adding photographs to the walls. Jungkook walked upstairs. Jimin stood beside the map holding a photograph between two fingers. His expression was not angry. That somehow made Jungkook more nervous. "Where did you get this?" Jimin asked. Jungkook stopped in the doorway. "I took it." "When?" "A long time ago." "How long?" Jungkook looked at the photograph. It showed Jimin standing alone outside a train station, his back turned toward the camera, a dark coat wrapped tightly around his body. Snow was falling around him. Jimin looked small beneath the enormous gray sky. Jungkook remembered the night immediately. He had been there, but Jimin had never known. 3 years ago," Jungkook said. Jimin's eyes narrowed. "Why didn't you show me?" Jungkook stepped inside. "Because you looked sad." "I was sad. I know." "Then why take a picture?" Jungkook hesitated. "Because I wanted to remember that you survived that day." Jimin's expression changed. "Survived? You were going through something difficult. You knew, not everything." Jungkook approached slowly. "But I knew enough to see that you were pretending to be okay." Jimin looked back at the photograph. "I don't remember you being there. You weren't supposed to." Jimin turned sharply. "Why?" Jungkook's jaw tightened. "Because you asked to be alone." Silence filled the room. Jimin lowered the photograph. "And you respected that?" "I tried, but you followed me, only from a distance." Jimin stared at him. "Why?" Jungkook looked down. "Because I was worried." Jimin's expression softened, but confusion remained. "You could have told me." "I wanted to, but you looked like you needed someone to protect your space, not someone to invade it." Jimin studied the photograph again. "What happened that day?" Jungkook's eyes moved toward the window. "You called me." Jimin frowned. "I don't remember. You said you didn't want to talk." Jungkook's voice became quieter. "You just asked me to stay on the phone while you walked." Jimin's eyes widened slightly. "You stayed for 2 hours." Jimin stared at him. "You didn't say anything. You didn't want me to." I don't remember that. That's okay, Jungkook smiled faintly. I remember enough for both of us. Jimin's fingers tightened around the photograph. Why keep this now? Jungkook did not answer immediately, because I thought it belonged here. Here, with the other memories. Jimin looked around the room. The walls were covered with photographs of laughter, vacations, dinners, mornings, sunsets, and ordinary moments. But this photograph was different. It carried no smile, no celebration, no warmth. It showed Jimin alone. This doesn't belong with the happy memories, Jimin whispered. Jungkook shook his head. That's exactly why it belongs here. Jimin looked at him. Why? Because you think your difficult days are proof that something is wrong with you. Jungkook stepped closer. They're not, they're part of you. Jimin looked away. I don't want to remember that version of myself. Then don't remember him as broken. Jimin's eyes filled with tears. How should I remember him? Jungkook answered without hesitation, as someone who kept walking. Jimin closed his eyes. A tear slipped down his cheek. Jungkook did not immediately touch him. He had learned that sometimes Jimin needed a moment before accepting comfort. After several seconds, Jimin whispered, I hate that you saw me like that. Why? Because I was weak. Jungkook shook his head. You were tired. That's the same thing. No, his voice was firm. It isn't. Jimin looked at him. Being tired means you carried something too heavy for too long. Being weak means you refused to carry it. Jimin stared at him. And you think I carried it? I know you did. Jimin's tears came faster. I didn't feel strong. You didn't have to. Jungkook stepped closer and gently touched his shoulder. You only had to keep going. Jimin finally leaned into him. Jungkook wrapped his arms around him. The photograph remained between them. For a while, neither spoke. Then Jimin whispered, there is something I never told you about that day. Jungkook pulled back slightly. What? Jimin looked toward the window. I wasn't just sad. Jungkook waited. Was thinking about disappearing. The words were quiet, almost swallowed by the room. Jungkook went completely still. Jimin, not dying, Jimin said quickly. I mean disappearing from everything, leaving, changing my number, going somewhere nobody knew me. Jungkook's chest tightened. Why? Jimin looked down. Because I thought everyone would be better without me. Jungkook's expression changed. Did you believe that? At the time. And now? Jimin took a long breath. Now I know it wasn't true. Jungkook gently held his hand. What changed? Jimin looked at him. You. Jungkook shook his head. No, yes, Jimin, you didn't fix me. Jimin's voice trembled. You just stayed close enough for me to remember that I existed. Jungkook's eyes filled. I don't know what to say. You don't have to. Jimin touched his cheek. That's what you taught me. Jungkook pulled him into another embrace. This time, Jimin held him just as tightly. When they finally separated, Jimin wiped his eyes and looked at the photograph again. Can we keep it? Jungkook blinked. You want to? Yes. Jimin placed it on the wall, but not because I want to remember the sadness. He looked at Jungkook. Because I want to remember that I made it through. Jungkook smiled. Then it stays. They stepped back together. The photograph now hung among all the others. It did not make the room darker. Somehow it made the room more honest. Jimin looked around and realized something. There are other photographs missing. Jungkook frowned. What do you mean? You've photographed hundreds of moments. Jimin pointed to the wall. But there are years you haven't shown me. Jungkook's expression changed. There are. Why? Some memories aren't mine to display. Jimin studied him. What does that mean? Jungkook looked at the floor. It means some things happened to you before I was part of your life. And you know about them? Some. How? Jungkook hesitated. You told me. When? You don't remember. Jimin stared at him. Jungkook, how much do you know about me? Jungkook's silence was answer enough. Jimin took one step back. What aren't you telling me? Nothing that you need to be afraid of. That's not an answer. I know. Jimin's voice became firmer. Then answer me. Jungkook looked toward the photograph on the wall. There is something I promised myself I would never tell you unless you asked. Jimin's heartbeat quickened. I'm asking. Jungkook took a slow breath. Before we met, someone contacted me. Jimin frowned. Who? Someone who knew you. Who? I don't know if the name they gave me was real. Jimin's face changed. What did they want? They wanted me to stay away from you. Silence. Why? Jimin whispered. Jungkook looked at him. They said you were dangerous to yourself. Jimin's face went pale. What? They told me you had a habit of disappearing whenever things became too difficult. Who was it? I never found out. You believed them? No, then why didn't you tell me? Because when I met you I realized they were wrong about one thing. What? You weren't dangerous. Jungkook paused. You were hurting. Jimin's eyes filled again. But who contacted you? Jungkook shook his head. I don't know. You never found out. I tried. And nothing. Jimin looked at the photograph again. Why are you telling me now? Because you found the photograph. Jungkook took a step toward him. And because I don't want secrets between us anymore. Jimin's mind raced. Suddenly, the old photograph felt different. It was no longer just evidence of a difficult day. It was evidence that someone had known about Jimin's pain before Jungkook ever entered his life. Someone had watched him, someone had contacted Jungkook, someone had wanted to keep them apart. Jimin sat on the edge of the bed in the corner of the room. Did they ever contact you again? Jungkook's answer came quietly. Yes. Jimin looked up. When? Last month. The room seemed to become colder. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want the surprise ruined. Jimin stared at him in disbelief. Jungkook, I know. You can't protect me by hiding things from me. I know. Then what did they say? Jungkook's jaw tightened. They said I should open the old storage box. What storage box? Jungkook looked toward the hallway. The one I found in this house. Jimin's heartbeat accelerated. What? Jungkook walked out of the room. Jimin followed. They went downstairs, through the hallway, and into a small storage room behind the kitchen. Jungkook unlocked an old cabinet. Inside sat a weathered wooden box covered in dust. Jimin stared at it. That wasn't here when we moved in. No, where did you find it? Behind the wall. Jimin's face tightened. Behind the wall, Jungkook nodded. The previous owner didn't mention it. Did you open it? Jungkook shook his head. Not yet. Jimin looked at the box. Why not? Because whoever hid it didn't want it found. That's never stopped you before. This time it did. Jimin reached toward the box but stopped. What's inside? I don't know. Jungkook took the box out carefully. Dust rose into the air. It smelled of old wood and paper. There was a small metal latch on the front. Jimin stared at it. Do you have the key? Jungkook's eyes moved toward him. No. Jimin instinctively touched the silver key hanging around his neck. He had started wearing it on a thin chain beneath his shirt. Jungkook noticed. That's not the key. I know. They examined the box. There was no visible lock mechanism. Then Jimin noticed a small symbol carved into the wood. A circle surrounded by 3 lines. His expression changed. I've seen this before. Jungkook looked at him. Where? Jimin touched the symbol. In a photograph. Which photograph? Jimin ran upstairs. Jungkook followed. Jimin searched through the photographs until he found one taken years earlier. It showed an old building in the background. On the door was the same symbol. This place, Jimin whispered. Do you remember it? Jungkook asked. Jimin shook his head. No. Then how did you recognize it? I don't know. He turned the photograph over. There was handwriting on the back. Jimin read it silently, his face drained of color. What does it say? Jungkook asked. Jimin looked at him. It says, if you ever remember the house, don't trust the person who brings you back. Jungkook stared at the sentence. Who wrote that? Jimin shook his head. I don't know. The room fell silent. Jungkook took the photograph carefully. This changes things. Jimin nodded. Yes. Do you want to stop? Jungkook asked. Jimin looked at the box downstairs, then at the photographs, then at Jungkook. His fear was obvious, but so was his determination. No. Jungkook waited. Jimin took his hand. If someone left something behind for me, I want to know why. Jungkook nodded. Then we'll find out together. They returned to the storage room. The box sat on the table between them. Jimin placed his hand on the lid. Jungkook placed his hand over Jimin's. Whatever is inside, Jungkook whispered. We open it together. Jimin nodded. Then, just as Jungkook reached for the latch, a sharp metallic sound came from somewhere outside the house. Both of them froze. The garden gate had moved. Neither had touched it. Jimin looked toward the dark window. Jungkook slowly stepped between Jimin and the glass. A second sound followed, softer this time. 3 knocks against the front door. Jimin's fingers tightened around Jungkook's hand. Neither spoke. Then a 4th knock came. Slow, deliberate, waiting. The 4th knock echoed through the house, and Jimin felt every muscle in his body tighten as Jungkook slowly turned toward the hallway. Neither of them spoke. The rain had stopped hours ago, yet the front garden was wet beneath the moonlight, and through the narrow window beside the storage room door, Jimin could see the shadows of the roses moving in the wind. Jungkook reached for his phone. Stay here. Jimin immediately shook his head. No, Jimin, you promised we wouldn't hide things from each other. Jungkook stared at him. I'm not hiding you, I'm protecting you. Then let me stand beside you. The word stopped Jungkook. His hand lowered. For several seconds they simply looked at each other. Finally, Jungkook nodded. Beside me. Jimin stepped closer. They walked toward the front hallway together. Another knock came. 3 short taps this time. Jimin's heartbeat hammered against his ribs. Jungkook reached the door but did not open it. He looked through the security screen. The porch was empty. There's nobody there. Jimin moved closer. Then who knocked? Jungkook checked the camera. The screen showed the front garden, the gate, the pathway, and the empty porch. No person, no movement, nothing. Then the screen flickered. Jimin inhaled sharply. For half a second, the image disappeared. When it returned, something was lying on the doormat. a small brown envelope. Jungkook opened the door only after checking the surroundings. He picked up the envelope without touching it directly and brought it inside. Jimin watched him. There was no name on the front, only the same symbol carved into the old wooden box. "That's it," Jimin whispered. "The symbol." Jungkook placed the envelope on the table. "Don't touch it yet." Jimin looked at him. "You think it's dangerous?" "I don't know." "Then why did you bring it inside?" Jungkook stared at the envelope. "Because whoever left it wanted us to find it." Jimin's stomach tightened. "That's not comforting. It wasn't meant to be." Jungkook put on gloves and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph and a folded piece of paper. He removed the photograph first. Jimin's face went pale. It showed the same old building from the photograph upstairs, but this picture had been taken recently. The building looked abandoned, its windows dark, its walls covered with vines. On the back was today's date. Jimin stared at it. "Someone was there today." Jungkook nodded. "Yes." He unfolded the paper. There were only 7 words written in black ink. "You were never supposed to find the house." Jimin read the sentence twice. His mouth went dry. "What house?" Jungkook looked toward the storage room. "This one." Silence fell between them. Jimin slowly sat down. "How could someone know about this place?" Jungkook's jaw tightened. "I don't know. They said the house." "I know. Jungkook, I'm here. What if they were watching us?" Jungkook looked toward the windows. "Then they wanted us to know." Jimin hugged his arms around himself. "Why?" Jungkook didn't answer. He picked up the photograph and studied it. Something about the image bothered him. "Wait." Jimin looked up. Jungkook zoomed in on the building. There was a small figure visible behind one of the windows. "Someone is inside." Jimin stood immediately. "Who?" "I can't tell." Jungkook enlarged the image. The figure was too distant, blurred by the glass, but something was clear. The person was holding a piece of paper against the window. "What does it say?" Jimin whispered. Jungkook stared. "I can't read it." Jimin moved closer. The image remained blurry. Then he noticed something else. A small red mark was visible on the figure's wrist. Jimin's breathing changed. "I've seen that." Jungkook looked at him. "Where?" "In my dreams." Jungkook went still. "Your dreams?" Jimin nodded. "I've been having the same dream for years." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I thought it was just a dream." Jimin's voice shook. "There's a hallway, a red door, someone standing at the end. I can never see their face." Jungkook's expression became serious. "And the mark, the person in my dream has the same mark." They stared at each other. "Jimin," Jungkook whispered, "you need to tell me everything you remember." Jimin closed his eyes. "I remember a smell." "What smell?" "Cedar." Jungkook's eyes widened. "Anything else?" "Rain." Jimin swallowed. "And music." "What kind?" "A piano." Jungkook slowly turned toward the room where the old record player sat. "The music from the surprise." Jimin's eyes widened. "What?" Jungkook walked quickly into the photograph room. Jimin followed. The record player sat exactly where it had been the night of the surprise. Jungkook lifted the needle. The melody stopped. "I found this record at an antique shop," he said. "You said it reminded you of something." Jimin stared at the black vinyl. "I didn't know why." Jungkook looked at the label. There was no artist name, no date, nothing except the same symbol. Jimin touched his forehead. Suddenly his breathing became shallow. "Jimin, wait." He closed his eyes. The melody returned in his mind. A hallway, a red door, a hand resting against old wood, someone whispering his name, then another voice, Jungkook's voice, but younger. "Don't open it." Jimin's eyes flew open. "Jungkook, what? You were there." Jungkook froze. "In my dream." "What did I say?" "You told me not to open the door." Jungkook stared at him. "I don't remember that." "You were younger." "Jimin, you were there." Jimin's voice became more urgent. "You told me to run." Jungkook looked genuinely frightened now. "I've never seen that place." "But you were there." "I would remember." "Maybe you don't." The words hung between them. Jungkook took a step backward. "What if?" He stopped. "What?" Jimin asked. "What if we met before we remember meeting?" Jimin stared at him. Neither of them spoke. The idea was absurd, impossible, and yet the evidence was beginning to accumulate. The photograph, the symbol, the dream, the old house, the mysterious message. Jungkook walked toward the wall of photographs and began examining them. "There," he pointed to one photograph. Jimin approached. It was an image from years ago taken at a public event. Jimin stood in the crowd. Jungkook stood several meters away. Neither was looking at the camera. Both were looking toward the same doorway. "That's impossible," Jimin whispered. "We didn't know each other then." "Apparently we did." Jimin looked at the date. "This was before we met." Jungkook stared at the photograph. "Maybe we didn't meet that day. Then why are we both looking at the same door?" They searched through more photographs. One showed Jimin entering a building. Another showed Jungkook leaving the same building minutes later. Neither photograph had been taken by them. Someone has been documenting us, Jungkook said. Min's hands became cold. For how long? I don't know. Who? I don't know. Jimin looked at him. You're supposed to know everything. Jungkook gave a strained smile. I wish. He reached for the wooden box. We need to open this. They returned to the storage room. Jungkook placed the box on the table. The latch was still closed. Jimin ran his fingers along the edge. There must be a key. Maybe. What if? Jimin pulled the silver key from beneath his shirt. Jungkook stared at it. No. Why not? Because that's the key to the house. You don't know that. Jimin inserted the key into the latch. It fit perfectly. Both of them stopped breathing. That's impossible, Jungkook whispered. Jimin turned the key. The latch clicked. The box opened. Inside were dozens of photographs, several letters, an old cassette tape, and a small metal object wrapped in cloth. Jimin stared at the contents. The top photograph showed a younger Jimin standing outside the same abandoned building. On the back was a date from years before they had supposedly met. Beneath it was a sentence. He came back. Jimin's hands shook. Jungkook picked up another photograph. It showed Jungkook standing near the same building. The back read, he remembers less every year. Jimin looked at him. What does that mean? Jungkook didn't answer. He picked up one of the letters. The paper was yellowed with age. There was no envelope. The first line was written in a handwriting Jimin recognized instantly. His own. Jimin's face drained of color. That's my handwriting. Jungkook stared at him. Are you sure? Yes. Jimin touched the page but hesitated. I wrote this. Jungkook carefully handed it to him. Jimin read the first sentence aloud. If you're reading this, then I failed to remember. His voice broke. Jungkook moved closer. Keep going. Jimin swallowed. The house isn't where the story began. It's where I tried to end it. Jungkook's face tightened. Jimin continued reading. Jungkook doesn't know what happened. He must never know unless I forget everything. Jimin stopped. His breathing became uneven. There's more. Jungkook pointed to the page. Jimin continued. If I forget, I will probably be afraid of him. I will probably believe he is the reason I am in danger. But that's not true. Jungkook was the one who saved me. Jimin looked up. Tears filled his eyes. Saved me from what? Jungkook's voice was barely audible. Jimin returned to the letter. From the person who made me believe I deserved to disappear. Silence. The words seemed to change the temperature of the room. Jimin's fingers trembled violently. Who was that person? Jungkook asked. Jimin shook his head. I don't know. Keep reading. Jimin looked down. The final lines were almost impossible to decipher. If Jungkook finds this, tell him. The sentence stopped there. The rest of the page had been torn away. Jimin stared at the missing section. Someone removed it. Jungkook nodded. Recently. Jimin looked at him. How do you know? Jungkook pointed to the torn edge. The paper is old, but the tear is fresh. Jimin's heartbeat accelerated. Someone had entered this house. Someone had opened the box before them. Someone had removed the ending. Jungkook picked up the cassette tape. We need to hear this. Do we have a player? Jungkook shook his head. I can find one. He placed the tape carefully into the box. Then the lights went out. Jimin gasped. Darkness swallowed the room. Jungkook immediately reached for him. I'm here. I know. Stay close. I am. Somewhere upstairs, a door creaked open. Both froze. Did you hear that? Jimin whispered. Jungkook nodded. Another sound followed. Footsteps, slow, measured, moving across the upstairs floor. Jungkook grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight. Stay behind me. Jimin held onto his shirt. They moved toward the stairs. The footsteps stopped. The entire house became silent. Jungkook slowly climbed the first step. Then the second. Jimin followed. At the top of the staircase, the hallway was empty, but the door to the unfinished room stood open. Jimin's breath caught. We left it closed. Jungkook nodded. They approached together. Inside, the jar labeled Someday had been moved from the shelf to the center of the floor. The lid was open. Every piece of paper they had placed inside was scattered around it. Except one. Jimin's face went pale. My note. Jungkook looked at him. Which note? Jimin stared at the empty jar. The one I wrote the first night. What did you write? Jimin whispered. I wrote that I wanted to stop waiting for happiness to leave. Jungkook's eyes moved across the floor. It's gone. Then Jimin noticed something lying beneath the window, a fresh photograph. He picked it up. It showed the two of them sitting in the garden earlier that evening. Someone had taken it from outside the property. On the back, beneath the image, were 4 handwritten words. Happiness makes you careless. Jimin's hand began to shake. Jungkook took the photograph. His expression hardened. They've been watching us. Jimin looked toward the dark garden. For how long? Jungkook had no answer. Then, from somewhere outside, came the sound of the garden gate opening again. This time, neither of them mistook it for the wind. The garden gate opened slowly, its hinges giving a long metallic groan that seemed to travel through every room of the house. and Jimin instinctively reached for Jungkook's hand as they stood frozen beside the upstairs window. "Don't move," Jungkook whispered. Jimin stared into the darkness beyond the glass. The roses swayed in the night breeze, their wet leaves reflecting the weak light from the house, but there was no visible figure. Then the gate stopped moving. Silence returned. Jungkook looked at Jimin. "Stay here, no, Jimin, you said beside you." Jungkook's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Then beside me." They descended the stairs together, every step creaking beneath their weight. The house felt completely different now, only a few hours earlier. The same hallway had felt warm and familiar. Now every shadow seemed to have a shape. Every sound seemed deliberate. Jungkook reached the front door and checked the security screen. The garden appeared empty. Nobody's there. Jimin stood behind him. Then why did the gate open? Jungkook opened the door carefully and stepped onto the porch. Cold air touched his face. Jimin followed. They walked toward the gate, their shoes pressing into the damp grass. The smell of roses was unusually strong. Near the gate, Jungkook noticed something caught beneath one of the hinges. He crouched and pulled it free. It was a small black ribbon. Jimin stared at it. "What is that?" "I don't know." Jimin reached for it, then stopped. Something about the ribbon made his stomach twist. "I've seen that too." Jungkook looked at him. "Where?" Jimin closed his eyes. The memory came in fragments. A corridor, a red door, a hand holding a black ribbon, someone tying it around his wrist. A voice saying, "If you forget me, follow the ribbon." Jimin opened his eyes abruptly. "I remember." Jungkook moved closer. "What? The ribbon?" Jimin took it from Jungkook's hand. "Someone tied one around my wrist." "When?" "I don't know." "Where?" Jimin shook his head. "The house." Jungkook looked toward the property. "This house? Maybe." Jimin pressed the ribbon between his fingers. There was a room with no windows. Jungkook's expression changed. "A basement? I don't know." "Did this house have a basement before?" "I don't remember." Jungkook immediately returned inside. Jimin followed. They searched the lower floor, checking every wall, every cabinet, every corner. Nothing appeared unusual until Jungkook moved an old bookshelf near the storage room. Behind it was a narrow wooden door. Jimin stared at it. That wasn't there before. It was hidden. Jungkook examined the frame. There are scratches around the lock. Jimin touched the wood. A sudden wave of dizziness hit him. He stepped backward. "Jimin, I'm okay. You're pale." "I'm remembering." Jungkook steadied him. "What do you remember?" Jimin stared at the door. "Someone brought me here." "Who?" "I don't know." "Were you alone?" Jimin shook his head. "No." His breathing became faster. "Someone was holding my hand." "Who?" Jimin looked at Jungkook. "You." Jungkook went completely still. "Me? I think so." "Jimin, I have never been inside this house before. Maybe you don't remember either." Jungkook stared at the door. His hand moved toward the lock but stopped. "We need to be careful." Jimin nodded. Jungkook found an old key in the storage cabinet. It didn't fit. He tried another. Nothing. Finally, Jimin remembered the silver key around his neck. He took it off. "Try this." Jungkook stared at the key. "It shouldn't work." "Try." Jungkook inserted it. The lock clicked immediately. Neither moved. Then Jimin whispered, "Open it." Jungkook turned the key. The door opened inward, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Cold air rose from below. It smelled of damp stone, cedar, and something faintly metallic. Jungkook turned on his flashlight. "Stay close." They descended slowly. The walls were covered with old marks. Some were dates, some were initials, some were small circles crossed by 3 lines. At the bottom was a narrow room with a single wooden chair and a table. On the table sat an old cassette player. Jimin stopped breathing. The tape. Jungkook looked at him. This is where it was recorded. Beside the cassette player lay a stack of photographs. Jungkook picked up the first one. It showed Jimin sitting in the chair. He looked younger, frightened, and exhausted. The date was years earlier. Jimin covered his mouth. "That's me." Jungkook picked up another. This one showed Jungkook standing beside him. He looked equally young. His hand rested on Jimin's shoulder. Jimin stared at the photograph. "We were here together." Jungkook's face had gone pale. "I don't remember." Jimin touched the photograph. "Neither do I." There were dozens more. Some showed them together. Others showed only Jimin. One showed Jungkook holding the black ribbon. Another showed Jimin writing at the table. Another showed them standing beside the red door from Jimin's dreams. "The door," Jimin whispered. "It's here." Jungkook looked toward the far wall. A narrow red door stood there. Jimin's knees weakened. "That's the door." Jungkook immediately took his hand. "You don't have to go near it." Jimin shook his head. "I need to." "Why?" "Because I think I left something behind." They approached. The door had no handle, only the same symbol. Jimin touched it. A memory struck him with such force that he almost cried out. He remembered sitting on the floor. He remembered crying. He remembered Jungkook kneeling in front of him. He remembered saying, "I don't want to remember." And Jungkook had answered, "Then you don't have to." Jimin opened his eyes. You were protecting me. Jungkook's face was tense. From what? From myself. Jimin turned toward the cassette player. Play it. Jungkook inserted the tape. Static filled the room, then a young voice emerged. Jimin's voice. If this recording is playing, then I forgot. Jimin's eyes filled with tears. Jungkook held his hand. The recording continued. I don't know who will hear this. Maybe me, maybe Jungkook, maybe someone who should never hear it. There was a long pause. I need to explain what happened because I know I will be afraid of the truth later. Jimin's breathing became shallow. There was someone who convinced me that I was the reason people left. They told me I destroyed everything I touched. They made me believe disappearing would make everyone happier. Jungkook closed his eyes. But Jungkook found me. The recording crackled. He didn't save me by forcing me to stay. He sat beside me and waited. Jimin looked at Jungkook. Tears rolled down his cheeks. He waited for hours. The younger Jimin's voice trembled through the speakers. Then he told me something I didn't believe. He said, you don't have to disappear to become someone worth keeping. Jungkook's eyes filled. Jimin pressed his hand against his mouth. The recording continued. I was afraid that if I remembered everything, I would become afraid of Jungkook because he was the only person who knew the truth. So I asked him to help me forget this place. A long silence followed. I asked him to take me away. Jimin looked at Jungkook. You did. Jungkook shook his head slowly. I don't remember. The recording continued. If I forget, Jungkook must not tell me. He must let me choose him again without knowing why. Jimin began crying harder. Because if I choose him without remembering, then I'll know it's real. Jungkook looked at him, completely overwhelmed. Jimin, the recording ended with one final sentence. And if someone tries to bring us back here, it means they failed to make me disappear. The tape clicked off. Silence filled the room. Jimin stood motionless. Jungkook gently pulled him into his arms. Jimin buried his face against his chest. I remember, Jimin whispered. Not everything. You don't have to. I remember enough. Jungkook held him tightly. Then tell me. Jimin took a trembling breath. The person who hurt me wasn't someone from the outside. Jungkook's body went rigid. Was it someone I trusted? Jimin pulled away slightly. Someone who had access to my life, someone who knew everything about me. Jungkook's expression hardened. Who? Jimin shook his head. I don't remember the name. But you remember the face? Jimin closed his eyes. No. Then how do you know? Because I remember the voice. What did they say? Jimin looked toward the red door. They said you would leave me eventually. Jungkook's face tightened. They were wrong. Jimin nodded. I know. Suddenly they heard movement upstairs. Both turned. A heavy sound came from the ceiling above them. Something had fallen. Jungkook immediately turned off the flashlight. Someone is in the house. Jimin's hand tightened around his. They stood silently in the darkness. Footsteps moved across the floor above, slow, then faster. Jungkook gestured toward the staircase. They waited. The footsteps stopped. A minute passed, then another. Finally, Jungkook turned the flashlight back on and began climbing. Jimin followed. They reached the upper floor and found the hallway empty. The front door was still locked. The windows were closed. Nothing appeared disturbed. Then Jimin noticed the photograph wall. One photograph was missing. The photograph of the night they had first discovered the old building. Someone took it. Jungkook scanned the room. Look, on the wall where the photograph had been was a handwritten message, not written in ink. It appeared to have been scratched into the surface with something sharp. Jimin stepped closer. The words were simple. You finally remembered. Beneath them was another sentence. Now ask Jungkook what he promised me. Jimin slowly turned toward Jungkook. Jungkook's face had gone completely still. What promise? Jimin asked. Jungkook said nothing. Jungkook, he looked down. I don't remember. Jimin's voice became softer. But whoever wrote that believes you do. Jungkook stared at the message. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the old photograph he had found earlier. He turned it over. For the first time, Jimin noticed something written on the back that they had not seen before. A sentence had been covered with black ink. Jungkook slowly rubbed the surface. The ink began to flake away. Beneath it appeared several words. I promised to protect Jimin until he remembered the truth. Jimin stared at the sentence. That's the promise. Jungkook nodded. But there's something else. He rubbed away more of the black ink. Another line appeared. And when he remembers, I must give him the name. Jimin's heart stopped. The name, Jungkook whispered. The name of the person who hurt me. They looked at each other. Jungkook's hands trembled. He turned the photograph over completely. At the bottom, beneath years of hidden ink, a name finally became visible. Jimin read it once, then again. His face changed instantly. No. Jungkook stared at him. You know that name? Jimin backed away from the photograph. I know it. Who is it? Jimin's lips trembled. Someone who has been close to us this entire time. Jungkook's expression hardened. Who? Jimin looked at him, tears filling his eyes. Someone we trusted. The fear in his voice was not the fear of the unknown anymore. It was the fear of recognition. Jimin finally whispered the name. Jungkook stared at him in stunned silence, and for several seconds neither of them spoke. Then Jimin took Jungkook's hand and said quietly, "We need to stop running from the past." Jungkook nodded. Together. And this time, when they returned to the hidden room beneath the house, they did not close the red door behind them. "Jungkook, we know the name now." Jimin's voice trembled as he stood beneath the dim hallway light, the old photograph still clutched between his fingers. The name they had uncovered belonged to someone they had trusted for years, someone who had appeared harmless, supportive, almost invisible whenever difficult moments came. But now every memory seemed to carry a second meaning. Jungkook looked at Jimin for a long moment before gently taking the photograph from his hand. "We don't have to confront them tonight," Jungkook said. Jimin shook his head. "Yes, we do." "Why?" "Because I spent too long being afraid of memories." Jimin wiped the tears from his cheeks. "I'm not going to be afraid of them anymore." Jungkook's expression softened. "Then I won't let you face them alone." They returned to the hidden room beneath the house. The red door stood silently at the far end, exactly as it had appeared in Jimin's memories. But this time, Jimin did not feel powerless when he looked at it. He felt different. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled him. Jungkook stood beside him. "Ready?" Jimin took his hand. "No." Jungkook smiled faintly. "Good answer." Jimin looked at him. "Why?" "Because being brave doesn't mean you aren't scared." Jimin squeezed his hand. "Then let's be scared together." Together, they opened the red door. Behind it was a small room filled with old boxes, photographs, letters, and recordings. Nothing supernatural waited there. No monster, no impossible secret, only evidence of a painful period of Jimin's life that someone had tried to bury. And among those belongings, they finally found the truth. Years earlier, someone Jimin trusted had manipulated his fears, convincing him that everyone around him would eventually abandon him. That person had secretly documented his struggles and used his vulnerability to control him. Jungkook had discovered what was happening before Jimin completely disappeared from everyone's life. He had stayed. He had protected Jimin without demanding anything in return. And when Jimin begged him to help erase the memories of that terrible period, Jungkook had respected his choice. But someone else had kept the evidence. Someone had waited. Someone had hoped that Jimin would eventually forget enough to become vulnerable again. That person was the one who had been leaving messages. The one who had taken photographs. The one who had entered the house. The one who had tried to reopen wounds Jimin had spent years learning to heal. Jimin listened to the final recording in silence. When it ended, he closed his eyes. "I remember now," he whispered. Jungkook stood beside him. "What do you remember?" Jimin looked at the photographs scattered across the table. "I remember being afraid of everyone." His voice shook. "Except you." Jungkook's eyes filled with tears. Jimin continued. "You were the only person who never asked me to become someone else." Jungkook reached for him. Jimin stepped into his arms. For a long time, neither moved. Then Jimin whispered against Jungkook's shoulder, "I'm sorry." Jungkook immediately pulled away. "Don't. I should have remembered." "No. I should have trusted you sooner." "No." Jimin looked into his eyes. "Then what should I do?" Jungkook smiled through his tears. "Stay." Jimin's expression broke into a smile. "I can do that." "Good." They left the hidden room together. The old box was not destroyed. The photographs were not burned. The letters were not thrown away. Jimin decided to keep them, not because he wanted to live in the past, but because he no longer needed to erase the person he had once been. The next morning, sunlight entered the house for the first time after many days of rain. Jimin stood in the garden beneath the old tree. Jungkook brought him 2 cups of coffee. "You're staring again," Jungkook said. Jimin smiled. "I'm remembering. Something bad." "No." Jimin looked at the house, then at the roses, then at Jungkook. "Something good." Jungkook handed him the coffee. "What?" "The first night you surprised me." Jungkook laughed. "You cried before you even saw the surprise." "I know. You scared me." "I was scared too." Jungkook sat beside him. "What changed?" Jimin looked down at the silver key hanging around his neck. "Everything." He touched the key gently. "I used to think love meant someone promising they would never leave." Jungkook listened. "Now I think love means having someone who tells you the truth, even when the truth is difficult." Jungkook smiled. And having someone who doesn't disappear when you're afraid." Jungkook took his hand. "And Jimin smiled. "And learning that I don't have to earn the right to be loved." Jungkook's eyes became wet. Jimin rested his head against his shoulder. "You gave me a house," Jimin whispered. Jungkook shook his head. "No." "A garden." "No." "A room full of memories." Jungkook smiled. "No." Jimin looked at him. "Then what did you give me?" Jungkook gently touched his cheek. "A place where you could finally stop running." Jimin's eyes filled with tears. "And you?" Jungkook smiled. "You gave me the same thing." They remained beneath the tree as the morning slowly brightened. Later that day, they returned to the room filled with photographs. Jimin took the photograph of himself at the train station and placed it beside the newest picture of himself and Jungkook standing in the garden. The 2 photographs could not have looked more different. In one, Jimin stood alone beneath a grey sky. In the other, he stood beside Jungkook beneath a sky full of sunlight. Jimin stared at them for a long time. Then he smiled. "Do you see the difference?" Jungkook stood beside him. "Yes." "What is it?" Jungkook pointed to the older photograph. "You were waiting for someone to come." Then he pointed to the newer one. "And now?" Jimin looked at Jungkook. "Now I don't have to wait." Jungkook smiled. Jimin took a fresh photograph from the camera and placed it on the wall. It showed the 2 of them sitting beneath the tree, their hands intertwined. Beneath it, Jimin wrote one sentence. "I stopped waiting for happiness to leave." Jungkook read it. Then he added another sentence beneath it. "And happiness stayed." Jimin looked at him. "That's cheesy." "I know. Very cheesy." "I know." Jimin laughed. Jungkook laughed with him. The hidden room remained beneath the house. The red door remained closed. The old photographs remained preserved. There were still unanswered questions about the person who had tried to manipulate Jimin's memories, and there were still parts of the past neither of them could fully recover. But those mysteries no longer had power over them. The past was no longer a prison. It was simply a chapter. And Jimin finally understood something he had spent years searching for. Home was not the house Jungkook had bought. It was not the garden. It was not the photographs. It was not the silver key. Home was the person who stayed beside him when the lights went out. The person who held his hand when old memories returned. The person who never demanded that he be fearless. Jimin looked at Jungkook. "Thank you." Jungkook smiled. "For what?" "For waiting." Jungkook squeezed his hand. "I'd wait again." Jimin shook his head. "You don't have to." Jungkook looked at him. "Why?" "Because I'm not running anymore." For a moment, Jungkook said nothing. Then he leaned closer and rested his forehead against Jimin's. Outside, the roses moved gently beneath the morning breeze. The house was quiet. The photographs watched over them. The silver key rested against Jimin's chest. And for the first time, neither of them wondered what tomorrow might take away. They simply looked toward tomorrow together. The surprise Jungkook had prepared that night had begun with photographs, flowers, a garden, and a small silver key. But Jimin had cried before seeing any of it, because the greatest surprise was something he had never expected to receive. The certainty that someone could know his fears, see his scars, remember his darkest days, and still choose him. Again, and again, and again. Jimin smiled. "Jungkook, Hamus, let's make another memory." Jungkook smiled back. "Which one?" Jimin took his hand. "One where we are not afraid." And together, Jimin and Jungkook walked into the sunlight, leaving the shadows of the old house behind them, not because the past had disappeared, but because it no longer decided where they were going. For the first time, the future did not feel like something waiting to happen. It felt like something they were free to create. Together.